I wish that child had never been born. My mother said this on a Wednesday night in November of 1853 in the kitchen of our house in Appling County, Georgia. And she said it to my father, and she did not know I was listening, and I have been listening for 74 years. The sentence has not stopped. It is still being spoken in the room where I heard it in the dark at the top of the stairs, and I am still 11 years old in that room, and I am also 85 years old in this room, and the two rooms are the same room because a sentence like that does not stay in the room where it was spoken. It moves into the person who heard it, and it furnishes every room that person enters for the rest of her life. I wish that child had never been born. 14 words. I have counted them because counting is what you do with things you cannot change and cannot discard and cannot put down. 14 words spoken in the dark by a woman who was tired, who was nursing a 6-week-old baby, who had 7 children and not enough food, and a husband who tried but did not try enough, and who said in a moment she believed was private, the thing that no mother should say and that my mother said, and that I heard from the top of the stairs where I had crept because I could not sleep and because the floorboards were cold and because I wanted water and because wanting water at 11 years old at 9 o'clock at night is the most ordinary thing in the world, and the ordinary thing brought me to the top of the stairs. At the exact moment the extraordinary thing was being spoken below. I went back to bed without the water. I have been thirsty since. My name is Winnifred Gault Inman. People have called me Freddie since I was small enough for a small name. Though the name Winnifred is not large, it simply does not fit a girl in the Wiregrass, a girl with sand in her shoes and pine sap on her hands, and no pretension to the kind of life that a name like Winnifred suggests. I was born on the 15th of September, 1842, in Appling County, Georgia, in the Wiregrass region of the southeastern part of the state, which is the part of Georgia that Georgia forgot, if Georgia ever knew it was there, which I am not certain it did. The Wiregrass. I should tell you about it because the Wiregrass is where the sentence was spoken and where I have lived with it and where it has echoed for 74 years. In a landscape that is flat enough for echoes to travel a very long distance before they die. Appling County is the piney woods, the interior, not the coast with its salt and its money and its houses with names, not the Piedmont with its red clay and its cotton, not the mountains with their elevation and their pride. The Wiregrass is flat, the soil is sand, the trees are long-leaf pine, tall and straight, rising from a floor of wiregrass, a tough bunch grass that grows in clumps between the trees and that gave the region its name and its character, which is endurance. Wiregrass does not yield, it does not soften. It grows in poor soil under hard sun, and it persists, and the people who live among it persist in the same way, stubbornly, without complaint, because complaint requires an audience, and the Wiregrass has no audience, just pines and sand and the flat horizon and the sky, which is the largest thing in the Wiregrass because there is nothing tall enough to interrupt it. We were poor. My father, Gault Surrency, farmed 50 acres of sandy soil that produced corn and sweet potatoes with the reluctant cooperation of ground that preferred to produce pines. He was a small man, thin, quiet, the kind of man who occupies a room without filling it, whose presence is more like an absence with a heartbeat. He was not unkind. He was insufficient. There is a difference between unkindness and insufficiency, and the difference is that unkindness is active and insufficiency is passive, and my father was the most passive man I have ever known, a man who allowed life to happen to him rather than participating in it, who watched his wife drown without reaching out a hand because reaching out was not in his nature, and his nature was the only thing about him that was strong. My mother was Zilphia Surrency, born Zilphia Dowling. She was the engine. In a household where my father was the chassis, she was the engine, the force that moved everything, that cooked and cleaned and planted and harvested and nursed and bore and managed and endured. She bore 7 children in 12 years. I will list them because the listing matters, because the list is the context for the sentence, and without the context the sentence sounds cruel, and with the context the sentence sounds desperate, and the difference between cruel and desperate is the difference I have spent 74 years trying to determine. Martha, born 1840, Gault Jr., born 1841. Then me, Winnifred, born 1842. Then the gap. No children for 4 years, whether by Zilphia's body's refusal or by some method of prevention I do not know. Then Harley, born 1846. Then Effie, born 1848. Then Dorcas, born 1850. Then Ira, born in October of 1853, 6 weeks before the sentence. 7 children, 12 years. Zilphia's body from the age of 18 to the age of 30 was a body in service to production, producing human beings with the same regularity that the farm produced sweet potatoes. And the production consumed her the way production consumes any machinery that is run without rest, wearing down the parts, thinning the walls, reducing the capacity until the machinery is still running, but running rough, running hot, running on the edge of the breakdown that the sentence represented. I was the 3rd child, the middle, not the first who was needed, not the last who was the baby. The middle, which is the position of least visibility in a large family, the position that receives the leftover attention after the first has claimed the responsibility and the last has claimed the indulgence. I do not believe my mother disliked me specifically. I believe I was the word she used to describe the weight, because I was the weight most recently added. Ira was only 6 weeks old when the sentence was spoken, but Ira was too new to be named as a burden, too fresh, still in the category of infant rather than child, and I, at 11, was a child, a walking, talking, demanding child who needed food and clothing and attention. And the needing was the weight, and the weight was what Zilphia named when she said, "I wish that child had never been born," or so I tell myself now at 85. At 11, I did not tell myself anything. At 11, the sentence was the entire world. I was at the top of the stairs. The stairs were narrow, pine plank, unfinished, the kind of stairs that are not a design choice but a structural necessity. Boards nailed to a frame that allows vertical movement between the sleeping loft and the living floor. I had come down from the loft where I slept with Martha and Effie because I wanted water. The kitchen was below. The kitchen was where the water was. The kitchen was also where my mother and father were sitting at the table after the children had been put to bed, sitting in the quiet that was the only quiet Zilphia received in a day filled with the noise of 7 children and a farm and the relentless demands of both. I heard my mother's voice before I reached the bottom of the stairs. She was speaking low, the way adults speak when children are supposed to be sleeping. The volume reduced, but the intensity increased. The words compressed by the lowness into something denser than normal speech. I stopped on the 3rd step from the bottom. I could see the kitchen through the gap between the wall and the stair rail. My mother was at the table. My father was across from her. The lamp was low. My mother's face was in the shadow between the lamp and the wall, and the shadow made her face look older than it was, which was 30, and more tired than I had seen it, which was very tired. And the tiredness was not the tiredness of a single day, but the tiredness of 12 years accumulated and compressed into the expression of a woman who had reached the bottom of something. She said, "I cannot do this any more, Gault." She said, "I am tired in my bones, and I am tired in my heart, and I do not have enough for all of them." She said, "I wish that child had never been born. She is a burden I did not ask for and I cannot carry. That child, not Winnifred, not Freddie, that child, the demonstrative, the distancing. That child, as though I were an object across the room rather than a person asleep upstairs, as though the word that could reduce a daughter to a that rather than a her or a she, and that was the sharpest part of the sentence, sharper than the wish, sharper than the burden, because that is the word you use for things that are not fully human to you, things that have become problems rather than people. And my mother had made me a that in her mouth, and the making was the wound, and the wound was immediate and permanent. My father said nothing. He sat across the table and he said nothing, and his nothing was the confirmation, because silence in the face of a statement like that is agreement, the passive man's agreement, the agreement of a person who does not contest what is said because contesting requires effort, and effort is not in his nature. He did not say, "Do not say that, Zilphia. She is our daughter." He did not say, "You are tired, you do not mean it." He said nothing, and the nothing and the sentence together formed the complete statement, which was, "Your mother wishes you had not been born, and your father does not disagree." I went back to the loft. I lay down between Martha, who was 13 and sleeping, and Effie, who was 5 and sleeping, and I was 11 and not sleeping, and the sentence was in bed with me the way a fever is in bed with you, present in every inch of the body, coloring every thought, making the familiar unfamiliar and the safe unsafe. The bed I had been sleeping in for years was no longer the bed of a wanted child. The house I had been living in was no longer the house of a wanted child. The mother downstairs was no longer the mother of a wanted child. Everything was the same and nothing was the same, and the difference was 14 words, and the 14 words were permanent. Before we continue, a quick word. I've released 14 full recordings that will never be on YouTube. These are the voices too personal, too raw to share publicly, completely unedited, nothing cut. If you want access, the link is in the description. It's called The Lost Recordings, and getting it helps us keep making these videos. All right, back to the story. I did not tell anyone, not then, not ever until now. I kept the sentence the way children in the Wiregrass kept everything, privately, silently, without the expectation that sharing would produce relief, because sharing was not a thing that was done in Appling County in 1853. You did not share hurts, you endured them. The endurance was the response, and the only response, and the response was insufficient, but it was all that was available, and I employed it, and I have employed it for 74 years, and the employment has been steady, and the sentence has not diminished under the employment. It is the same size today as it was in 1853, 14 words, the same 14. I wish that child had never been born. At 18, the sentence was a motive. I married Josiah Inman in 1860. I was 18. Josiah was a turpentine worker, 24, from the camp south of Baxley. He was not a man I would have chosen if choosing had been a process I understood myself to be engaged in. Choosing requires a standard, and my standard had been destroyed at 11. My standard after the sentence was, "Anyone who will have me." The standard was the sentence inverted. The sentence said I should not exist, and the marriage said someone wanted me to exist near them, and the wanting, even from a man I did not love, was a counterweight to the sentence, a refutation, a proof that the sentence was not universally true, even if it was maternally true. Josiah was adequate. He worked. He provided. He was not cruel. He was not warm. He occupied the same territory of male insufficiency that my father had occupied, the territory of men who are present without being available, who fill a chair without filling a room. I married him because he asked, and the asking was a gift from a world that my mother had told me, in 14 words, did not want me. We lived in the Wiregrass. We had 5 children. The children are the place where the sentence did its most complicated work. I wish that child had never been born. At 25, the sentence was a template, an anti-template, a mold I would pour the opposite of. My first child, a daughter, was born in 1867. I named her Zilphia, after my mother. I have examined this decision for 60 years, and I have not determined whether it was love or defiance or the particular cruelty of giving a woman's name to a child that the woman's ghost would have to share space with, a child who would be wanted in every way that the name's original bearer had failed to want her own. I named her Zilphia, and I held her and I said, aloud, in the room where she was born, so that the walls could hear it, and the air could carry it, and the sentence could receive its first direct refutation. You are wanted. I want you. You are not a burden. You are the thing I asked for. I said this to a newborn who could not understand words, and the saying was not for the newborn. The saying was for the 11-year-old at the top of the stairs. The saying was the thing the 11-year-old needed to hear and did not hear, and that I was now providing, 14 years late, to a proxy who shared the name of the woman who had failed to provide it. I told all my children they were wanted, every day. I told them in the morning when they woke, and at night when they went to bed, and at meals and between meals, and at every transition in the day that permitted the telling. I told them with a frequency and an intensity that I recognize now was excessive, that was compensatory, that was about my wound as much as about their needs. I was not merely loving my children. I was performing the opposite of the sentence. I was constructing, word by word, day by day, the refutation of I wish that child had never been born. I was building a house of I'm glad you were born, and the house was beautiful. And the house was also a monument to the sentence, because a monument is a response to the thing it memorializes. And my monument was a response to 14 words spoken in a kitchen in 1853, and the response, however loving, was shaped by the wound. And the wound's shape was visible in the response if you looked carefully enough. My children grew up loved, overloved perhaps, loved with an intensity that was sometimes suffocating, a love that held too tight because the hands doing the holding had been empty too long and the emptiness had made the grip desperate. They are grown now. They are well. They did not hear the sentence from me because I did not speak it, and the not speaking was the hardest discipline of my life and the most important. I wish that child had never been born. At 40, the sentence was a question. Zilphia, my mother, died in 1880. She was 57, worn out. I cannot use any other phrase because no other phrase is accurate. She was worn out the way a garment is worn out, the fabric thinned by use, the seams separated by stress, the original material still present but no longer capable of performing the function it was designed for. She had borne 7 children and raised them to adulthood and fed them from a sandy farm that did not want to produce food, and she had done this with a husband who was passive and a body that was depleted and a spirit that had, on at least one night in November of 1853, broken under the weight. I cared for her in the final years. I performed the duties of a daughter. I cooked for her, cleaned for her, managed her declining body, with the competence that was my inheritance from her, the competence she had transmitted to me alongside the sentence. I did this without warmth. I did this with thoroughness and without warmth, and the distinction between the two was my mother's punishment, which I administered daily, silently, through the quality of care that was impeccable and the temperature of the care that was cold. She received excellent nursing and no affection. She received provision without love. She received from me what I had received from her after the sentence, which was the maintenance of a relationship from which the essential element had been removed. She did not know why I was cold. She did not know I had heard the sentence. She occasionally looked at me with an expression that might have been confusion or might have been recognition, the expression of a mother who senses that something is wrong between herself and her daughter, but who cannot identify what, and I did not help her identify it because identifying it would have required me to say, I heard you, and the saying would have opened a conversation I was not prepared to have because the conversation would have required her to respond, and the response might have been, I meant it, which I could not survive, or the response might have been, I did not mean it, which I would not have believed, and neither outcome was endurable, so I chose the silence and the cold and the excellent nursing and the absence of love, and the choice lasted until she died. After she died, I began to ask, did she mean it? The asking took years, decades. The asking required me to step outside the 11-year-old's understanding and into a different understanding, an adult understanding, a mother's understanding, because by 40 I was a mother of 5, and I knew things about motherhood that the 11-year-old did not know, primarily this, that a mother can love her children completely and still, in a moment of extremity, wish the weight of them were lighter, that the wishing is not a retraction of the love. It is a cry from inside the love, a cry that says the loving is consuming me, and I need the consuming to stop for one moment so I can breathe. Did Zilphia mean it? I believe now, at 85, that she meant it the way a drowning person means help, not as a permanent statement of desire, as a gasp, a release of pressure, an expulsion of air that has been held too long. The sentence was not Zilphia's verdict on my existence. It was Zilphia's surrender to the weight of an existence that included me and 6 other children and a passive husband and a sandy farm, and a body that had been used up by production, and a life that had offered her no exit except the one she found in 14 words spoken to a man who did not respond, in a kitchen where she believed she was alone. She was not alone. I was on the stairs, and the gasping that was a sentence entered me and became not a gasp but a foundation, not a moment but a permanent condition, because a child does not hear the gasp. A child hears the words, and the words said, I wish that child had never been born. And the child heard it, and the child believed it, and the child has been living inside the belief for 74 years. I wish that child had never been born. At 85, the sentence is an object. I can hold it now, not comfortably, not lightly, but I can hold it the way you hold a stone you have been carrying in your pocket for so long that the pocket has shaped itself around it, and the stone has been warmed by the body's heat, and the weight has become so familiar that putting it down would feel like loss rather than relief. I can hold the sentence, and I can turn it, and I can see it from angles that the 11-year-old could not see because the 11-year-old was inside the sentence, and I am now, at 85, beside it. The sentence was 14 words. It has occupied 74 years. The ratio is absurd. 14 words should not be able to furnish 74 years of living, but they did. They furnished every room I entered. They furnished the bedroom where I lay with Josiah and felt the sentence between us like a third body. They furnished the kitchen where I cooked for my children and told them they were wanted with a persistence that mystified them because they did not know what I was countering. They furnished the parlor where I sat with Zilphia in her declining years and administered excellent care with cold hands. They furnished this room where I sit now, 85 years old, in a house in the Wiregrass, telling the sentence to the air for the first time because the air is the only audience left, and the sentence needs an audience that is not me because I have been its only audience for 74 years, and I am tired. Josiah died in 1910. My children are grown. Little Zilphia, who is not little and who is 60, lives in Baxley. Gault, my youngest, named for my father, lives with me here. He is 50. He does not know about the sentence. None of my children know. They know their mother loved them fiercely, and they know their grandmother was distant, and they do not know the connection between these two facts, which is that the fierceness was the antidote to the distance, and the distance was the wound that the fierceness was treating. I went to the site of the old house last week. The house burned in 1891. The foundation stones are still visible, overgrown with wiregrass, the grass growing up between the stones the way the sentence grew up between the years, filling every available space. I stood where the kitchen was. I could identify it by the position of the chimney stones, which are larger and which mark where the stove sat. I stood in the kitchen and I looked up at where the stairs had been, the stairs that are gone, the pine planks that have been ashes for 36 years, and I looked at the empty air above me, where the top of the stairs would have been, the place where an 11-year-old girl crouched in the dark with her hand on the rail and her mouth open, and the water she had come for forgotten because the thing she was hearing was more consuming than the thirst. I said the sentence aloud, for the first time, in my own voice rather than in the voice I have carried for 74 years, which is my mother's voice, low and tired and compressed. I said it in my voice, which is 85 years old and thin and does not carry far in the open air of the Wiregrass, but which carried far enough to the foundation stones, to the place where the stairs were, to the 11-year-old who is still there. I wish that child had never been born. I said it and I heard it, and the hearing was different this time because the voice was mine and the saying was deliberate, and the deliberateness changed the sentence from a thing that happened to me into a thing I was choosing to hold and examine and set down. I held it, I examined it, I set it down, on the foundation stones, in the Wiregrass, where the kitchen was, where my mother sat, where the sentence was born. And then I said the thing I have needed to hear for 74 years, the thing Zilphia never said, the thing my father's silence confirmed would never be said, the thing nobody has ever said because nobody knew it needed saying except me, and I did not know I could say it to myself until I stood in the ruins of the house where the sentence was spoken and understood that the only person left who could repair the damage was the person who had sustained it. I said, but the child was born. The child was born and she lived. She lived for 85 years. She married a man she did not love because the sentence had broken her standard for being loved, and she was married to him for 50 years, and she survived the marriage, and the surviving was its own accomplishment. She bore 5 children, and she told them every day that they were wanted because she knew what it sounded like when a child was not wanted, and she would not produce that sound, not once, not ever, and she did not produce it, and the not producing was the hardest discipline of her life and the most important. She cared for the mother who spoke the sentence, and she cared for her with competence and without warmth, and the competence was an act of duty, and the absence of warmth was an act of honesty, and both were real, and both were hers. The child was born, and she lived, and she is standing in the Wiregrass in the ruins of the house where the sentence was spoken, and she is 85 years old, and she is saying, I am glad I was born. I am glad despite the sentence. I am glad despite the 74 years of carrying it. I am glad because the carrying produced something. It produced a woman who knows what words do to children, who knows that a sentence spoken in a kitchen at 9 o'clock at night when no one is supposed to be listening can enter a child and stay there for a lifetime and furnish every room the child will ever enter. Who knows this and who has been careful, so careful, for 74 years with every word she has spoken in every room where a child might be listening. The sentence made me careful. The wound made me gentle. I would not have chosen this education, but I received it, and I have used it, and the using is the answer to the sentence. The sentence said, I should not exist. I exist. I have existed for 85 years. I have existed carefully and gently and with the full knowledge that my existence was questioned by the person who produced it, and I exist anyway. The sentence did not win. The child did. The child at the top of the stairs who heard the worst thing a child can hear from the person a child most needs, and who went back to bed and who got up the next morning and who has gotten up every morning since for 74 years and who is getting up still, the child won, not without damage, not without the sentence in her pocket and the weight of it in every step. But she won. She is here. She is standing in the Wiregrass where the house used to be, and the house is gone, and the stairs are gone, and the kitchen is gone, and the mother is gone, and the sentence is still here, but the child is still here too, and the child is older than the sentence now, and the child is tired of carrying it, and the child is putting it down, here, in the Wiregrass, where it was spoken, where it lived, where it ends. I am glad I was born. I am 85 years old, and I am glad. And that is the last thing I have to say about the 14 words my mother spoke on a Wednesday night in November of 1853. The child was born. The child won.